The other big way we're going to see this one-mindedness is through discussion. And this story is a big one. In chapter 15, this is going to be the beginning of Christianity as its own religion. You see, because up to this point, all the Christians were Jewish. They were Jews who believed Jesus was the Messiah, and they were viewed as Jews in the Roman Empire. This is actually how Christianity was able to kind of get a start. Because new religions were not tolerated in the Roman Empire. When the Romans would conquer an area, they would take their traditional religion, their traditional gods, and they would mix them in with the Roman gods. They'd have a temple, they'd bring the Roman gods in, and they take the local gods, and they say, what gods do you have? And sometimes they'd say, oh, that's the same thing as us. And they'd just say, oh, well, our Mars is your whatever, and our god Jupiter is your god this or that. And so they just got syncretized. But you weren't allowed. Following new religions was not something that was accepted in the Roman Empire. Especially this, as we'll later see, this Christianity, which said, no, you can't worship the Roman gods. Anyways, the Jews were an exception. The Jews, they didn't have the gods to mix in there because they didn't worship any gods but their God, Yahweh. But they were allowed, unlike virtually everywhere else in the Roman Empire, everyone else, they were allowed to worship Yahweh and not worship the Roman gods because the Romans respected the antiquity of the religion. The religion was so old. And they said, that's been here, this is their customs. And they respected that. And then they also respected the Torah, basically. They liked the way that Jews would follow the Torah, and they didn't need policed by the Romans, right? They could trust the Jews to follow their own laws, and so they didn't have to worry about looking out for them. As a matter of fact, they would often use them to build and settle new cities because they were law-abiding in their own tradition. And what was that tradition? Well, that was one where you take care of people, right? Where you didn't steal from them and kill them and do all these things that cause the decay of society and human life. Anyway, the point is that in the beginning, all the Christians were Jews. They were Jews who believed Jesus was the Messiah. And therefore, to the average Roman, someone who believed in Jesus, didn't believe in Jesus, they were just all Jews. Now, the Jewish religious authorities in Jerusalem, they condemned the belief that Jesus was Messiah. And they proclaim that anyone who preaches or believes that Jesus is the Messiah should be kicked out of the synagogues. So Christianity was a heretical Jewish sect, right? There was a separation between mainline Judaism, who did not accept Jesus as Messiah, and those Jews who did accept Jesus as Messiah, right? The first Christians. But they were all Jewish. You just had the mainline Jews, and then you had the Christians who were Jewish heretics in the minds of the mainline Jews. But since they were just all since they were all Jewish, the Romans didn't mind Christianity. They didn't really understand, probably. Most Romans didn't really understand the difference between Christianity and mainline Judaism. And they didn't care either. So the early Christians were protected, kind of, because they were seen as within the Jewish exception. That group that did not have to worship the Roman gods. Anyways, what happened was that Peter had received a vision that he should baptize some Gentiles. It was the house of a God-fearer named Cornelius, a Gentile who had gone to the Jewish synagogues, but never converted to Judaism, because that would require circumcision and following of the Jewish dietary laws. Now, there were a lot of people like this. They were called God-fearers. They were non-Jews who were into Judaism, who studied it and even went and prayed in the synagogues. But they didn't really understand why God would care if they were circumcised or not. And they didn't really understand about the dietary laws. Why would God care about that? They maybe weren't at the point where they say, well, I just don't want to stop eating with all my relatives because they're eating pork. And so some of the ritual customs that didn't have the moral meaning of some of the more profound and obviously moral dictates of the Torah kind of held them back in a lot of ways from becoming Jewish. But St. Peter had his vision, and he was instructed to go to the house of Cornelius, and he saw the Holy Spirit come down upon Cornelius and his family, and so he baptized them. And so Gentiles began to be baptized without becoming Jewish first. Now, there were some members of the church some other Jews who believed Jesus was Messiah, right? Who said, wait a minute, you can't do this. Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. You have to be circumcised and follow the Jewish dietary laws in order to be saved by Jesus Christ. And so Paul and Barnabas, they did not believe this. They knew what Peter had done. They themselves were baptizing Gentiles, non-Jews. And so, well, let's go down to Jerusalem. Let's go down to that beginning of the church. Let's go down to that group down there. They were the first Christians. And who's down there? The apostles are down there. And the presbyters, these are the elders, right? This is actually our technical term for priests today still. Presbyter, elder. And let's talk about it. And I said, is it necessary for these non-Jews to observe the Mosaic law if they want to join the church? And what did they do? They had a debate. They talked about it. They discussed it. After much debate, Peter got up and said, now this is Peter, right? Who is seen from the early days of the church as the head of the church, right? We call him in Catholicism the first pope, right? And he doesn't just say, hey, everybody, this is what it is. This is the way it was. God told me. You guys listen to me, follow me. No, he pleads his case. He talks about it. And he explains. God's told me that we shouldn't make a distinction. God purifying our hearts. And he makes a point. He says, we never followed these laws ourselves. God gave them to us, but we never were able to do all this stuff. And we're not saved by following the law. We're saved through the gift of God's love in Jesus Christ. And people listened and they thought about it. And then it was not Peter, but James, who is it was acting as the head of the assembly here. James, who's known as the brother or relative of Jesus. Not one of the 12 apostles, right? He wasn't a pope or a bishop. in the most traditional technical lines, but he would be akin to a presbyter or a priest in leading the assembly. He would be akin to a deacon that we'll see soon as a leader of the assembly. He would be akin to a bishop in the overseeing of the community or the church. But he doesn't make the decision in an authoritarian way. Everybody listens to everyone, and then he voices the common decision, right? He's not coming down and says, this is the answer. No, he's saying, this is what we've come together with ourselves, right? And you can read that passage. And given what the other people says, he says, it's my judgment. So this is a discussion. And he says, they don't need to follow every little technical aspect of the law of Moses. But he says this, just make sure they're not doing some of this stuff that did go on in the Gentile cities, right? They shouldn't eat food that's offered to idols. They shouldn't be marrying relatives, right? They shouldn't eat meat with blood in it or just drink blood as food, right? Just the basic things. And where he got these blood laws, was from an older covenant. This was from the covenant that God made with Noah after the flood. So he says, let's take maybe they can't follow the Torah, but remember, we're not saved by following the rules. We're saved by openness to the grace of Christ, right? To accepting God's hospitality and then becoming hospitable ourselves. And so he goes back to an older covenant. He says, well, this one's a little simpler. It's the same. It's the same idea. And so then the apostles, the presbyters, in agreement with the whole church, right? So they come to an agreement. It's not a top-down decision from James or anyone else. They send representatives to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas, and they share that movement, that idea, that decision that they've come to together through discussion. Now, so they're one-minded, right, through prayer and discussion. And this, again, is how Christianity will become its separate religion. Once we start baptizing Gentiles, non-Jews, and bringing them into the church, people that aren't circumcised and don't try to follow all the dietary laws of Moses, all the laws of Moses, now we kind of are going to be seen and understood as a different religion, because Judaism was primarily defined and understood as people who follow the law of Moses, right? The church is going to be defined in a different way, not as people who follow a set of rules or a set of laws, but as people who choose to participate in the grace of God, right? People who live a life of faith in Jesus Christ and act as his body on earth.